Okay, we are in Tzidkas Hatzadik, Ois Yotes, Ois Chaf. I mentioned last week, I gave an introduction to this, in my Pirush of Reb Tzadok, it says here, Mikan, from Yotes, Ad Ois Chaf Ches, all the way until 28, Oisek Rabbeinu Berimze Hasugya Sholosh Mishmaris. So we have almost 10, it's really 10, I don't know why it counts that way, 10 letters in Tzidkas Hatzadik where every word is very, very valuable in different subjects. 10 dedicated to 2 lines in the Gemara, Brachas Gimel Amud Aleph. And there the Gemara says, I'll just review for you, Shloshim Mishmaris Have Halayla. The Gemara is talking about when is the Zman Kriya Shema Shel Arvis. So the Gemara says, when can you say Shema Ba'arvis? The answer is a night. So when is night? So the Gemara says, Ad Soif HaShmoira HaRishona. Says Rashi, what is it, HaShmoira HaRishona? Changing of the guards in Shemayim. Okay, Rashi adds that Malachim changed their positions in Shemayim. I have no idea what this means, but the Malachim changed their positions in the Shemayim, and that's somehow or another indicates to us that the Zman Kriya Shema Shel Arvis begins at Tzeisak Echavim, as the Gemara says, and ends at Soif HaShmoira HaRishona. And the Gemara says, why doesn't the Gemara ask the question, the obvious question, if you want to say Ad Soif HaShmoira HaRishona, if you want to say that it ends at Chatzos, let's say, so just say Ad Chatzos. The Gemara says, what do you have to say, speak in Ramazim for? So the Gemara says that because he wants to teach us this thing, that this Yesod, that just like there are Mishmaris in the Aretz, there are Mishmaris in the Shemayim. Or like the Rosh says, just like there are Mishmaris in the Shemayim, there are Mishmaris in the Aretz. It's very interesting, the 2 different Girsas. But for us right now, let's understand there's something parallel going on in the Shemayim and the Aretz. And this is somehow important for us to know. Why is it important for us to know? So Reb Tzadok explains in Yud Tes, based on the Gemara at the end of Brachas, the Gemara says there, the Gemara says a Chiddush, Rav Shesha says a Chiddush, that Malchusa de Rakia Kirachusa de Ara. Again, a Machlokas in Girsois, Malchusa de Ara ke Malchusa de Rakia. That just like there's Malchus in Shemayim, there's Malchus here. I will explain that in a moment. But the Gemara tells a story, just for reference, the Gemara tells a story about Rav Sheshus, who was Sagi Nahar, he was blind, and the big Talmud Chacham, but blind, and the minim, the Apokorsim at that time, were always trying to trip him up, and there's great depth in these stories, but that's not our subject right now. And the min was standing to Rav Sheshus, and he was telling him, the entourage of the Melech is coming through. King, Roman king, was coming through, emperor. So all of a sudden there was a big tumult. Now he was blind, Rav Shesha. All of a sudden there was a big tumult and trumpets, whatever the tumult was. And the men said to Rav Shesha, oh, there's the king. And Rav Shesha said, no, that's not the king. And then was some other kind of a big irua. And the men said to Rav Shesha, oh, there is the king. And Rav Shesha said, it's not the king, he's blind. And then finally, Rav Shesha said to him, now the king is here. He said, how do I know? How do you know that? He was right, because it's quiet. When the king comes, it's quiet. And he says, how do I know this? Because that's what goes on in the Shemayim. Rav Shesha was referencing, he knew what's going on in the Malchus Da'ara, based on what he knew about the Malchus of the Rakia. He was Sagi Nor, think of the words. He is Sagi Nor. He knew what was going on in the Malchus of the Rakia, and he was able to determine what was going on here. And when Hashem is actually coming, or let's say it differently, when the Geula actually comes, we're envisioning trumpets and parades, and I think that'll be part of it maybe, but Kol Demama Daka, it's quiet time, when respect sometimes is just to be quiet. Quiet. Not to sing, not to dance, not to scream, not to throw rice. Quiet. Kol Demama Daka. So let me just explain a little bit that which those of us that learned Nefesh Chaim together know this very, very well. that there are different midos of Hashem, spherois of Hashem, chesed, gvura, tiferes, netzach, hod, yesod, malchus. So malchus is the final, meaning the goal, the go-to place of Hashem. What does it mean? It means to say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way I always understand it and explain it is that, like we can think something, we can plan something, we can have all kinds of good ideas and all kinds of good goals, but when you do it, it's done. Right? A person can, put aside money for tzedakah and create a special, foundation and allocate the money. But if the money doesn't go out, you didn't give tzedakah. The fact is you didn't give tzedakah. The word malchus means that this is what's happening here in this world. Yosef was a melech. Yosef haya b'Mitzrayim. He was bashetach. He was in the earth. He was on the earth. This is where the malchus is. According to the Mekubalim, which is, as I always say, the first 3 pages of any Kabbalah Sefer you're going to open, the whole purpose of Hashem creating the world was to create malchus. Malchus means the malchus which is in Shemayim, Hashem melech. Melech means in charge of everything. Melech means everything that goes on is Hashem Echad. So this is the pshat in the Gemara, just like there's malchus in Shemayim, there's malchus ba'aretz. It's not just like a chafadimyan. It's the same thing. The whole purpose of the world is for the malchus to roll itself out into this world. So if it rolls itself out into this world, when the melech is really here, the melech, malchus da'ara kim malchus da'rakia, it's quiet. And that's what Rav Sheshis knew. So what we need to know is, here we have an indication, and this is what the Gemara is saying here in Brachas Daf Gimel. We have some kind of an indication, some kind of a sign, which tells us by what's going on in this world, what's going on in the Shemayim. And if you're really smart, by what's going on in the Shemayim, you can know what's going on in the Aretz. Depends on your point of departure. So this is the 10 oisios in Reb Tzadok are all coming to explain how, from looking at this world, you could understand the Shemayim, and from understanding the Shemayim, you can understand the Aretz, and that is the midah of Malchus. That's what Malchus means. That's the word. That's what the word means in Lashon HaKodesh. Malchus. Yeah, Malchus Shalchahi. Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimloich L'Olam V'ed. The whole idea of the Geula and Mashiach and all of that has to do with Malchus Hashem. That's what it all has to do with. That meaning that our religion, our spirituality, is not otherworldly. It's not esoteric. It's not austere. It's not sublime. It's here. It's right here. The Malchus has to be right here, down to earth. We can't say this Yesod enough because it's really the pshat in everything we live. It's the pshat in why we do mitzvahs. When we're doing mitzvahs, just be spiritual. But if you don't actually do something, it's like we have it in our head and we didn't bring it lamaisa. It's chaser b'malchus, felt malchus. That's the whole idea of actually getting stuff done. Getting stuff done, doing something, making a difference here in this world is Malchus Hashem, making a difference. So you have to, like, we're put in this world to make a difference. I spoke last week, a brief chazara. The first pshat in Reb Tzadok, well, first the Gemara. Gemara brings the strangest signs. Gemara says, Brachas Daf Gimel, you'll know the mishmaros are happening in Shemayim by what's going on here in this world. Because at the beginning of the first mishmar, machlokes in Gemara, the beginning or the end, but the beginning of the first mishmar, chamar nowhere. You will hear, if you live in a agricultural world, I guess, you will hear chamar nowhere. You will hear donkeys braying. Thank you. We don't hear that. I hear the seminary. You hear it? The second Mishmar to Gemara, you will hear that, and then you'll know, okay, the first changing of the guard in Shemayim. And then you'll hear, if you get to the second one, you'll hear klavim tsayakim. You'll hear dogs barking. Maybe. We do hear like hyenas or whatever. Doesn't that Jackals. Jackals. And the third siman is the baby's crying, asking for food. Nurse me. And the husband and wife are talking about the tzrachei hayoim, what's going to happen today. That's your sign of the third mishmar. I mentioned last week that the babies didn't learn the Gemara because they're up at 11 o'clock and 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock. But the siman is rather that chamor noyer. So last week I explained the first pshat in Reb Tzadok, and all of them are true, is that what's really being described here when we're talking about what happens during the night is what happens during the Golus. And what happens during the Golus has its stages. Stages is the key word here for today. There's 3 stages. So there's 3 stages in Golus. And I explained based on this Reb Tzadok a little bit, but Reb Tzadok and Dover Tzadok Ois Ches, where he talks about the Golus having 3 stages. The first stage was the stage which was closest to the Beis HaMikdash. The second stage was like the middle of the night. And the third stage was the awakening, starting to see the sun, see little simanim of the sun. And I said my own Torah that the first stage was a good stage for Klal Yisrael. It was the time of Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. The Mishnah was done, the Sanhedrin was still going. It was the first stage of Golus was, okay, it was Golus. We were missing the Beis HaMikdash, but it was actually a time of great, one can argue, even greater development of Torah than there was, of Torah Shebaal Peh, than there was even when the Beis HaMikdash was Chaim. It was unbelievable. Talmidei Rabbi Akiva, Talmidei Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Mishnayos. It was an unbelievable time. That was, Reb Tzadok says, still the or of the Beis HaMikdash shining in a certain way, but that was the avodas halayla. Understand this deeply. It means that a Laila came into the world. There was a Choshech came into this world. What are we going to do in Choshech? What's our first avoda? To bring or. And that's what Rabbi Akiva did, or Akiva. Right? Rabbi Akiva brought or, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi brought or into the world. And then it ended. I posited that if you'll take the Laila, I mentioned it on Shabbos also, if you'll take the years of Golus and you'll divide them into 3, like let's see what happens when you actually take from the 2,000 years of Golus, let's call it 2,000 years of Golus, and if you'll divide, it's approximately, we don't know when the Golus is over, but we know when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed in 70 AD. Let's call it, the Gemara calls it 2,000 years. It's fascinating to see that all of the Tanoim and then the early Amoraim were all in that first third. They were all in that first third in Eretz Yisrael before we were thrown. And then what happened in 625 or 630 AC? What happened? What happened was the Muslims took over Israel. It was the time of Mohammed. That was the time of building of the Dome of the Rock. That's when that's from, 625, I think. And everything changed here. Everything's changed here. Eretz Yisrael was not the makam of Or. There was always a Jewish inhabitants here where we live, or in Eretz Yisrael anyway, but it was different than the time of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. It was changed. And then that was like the Emsa Halayla, the Emsa Hagolus. And it worked so perfectly in the years, I pointed out. And then the Ashmara Shlishis was the Jews came back. The Jews came back to Israel in the 13th century, 14th century, which made way for all of the people from Gerush Sfarad. I just as on a different note, I'll try to see if anybody makes this point that I make, but I Min Hashamayim Zarakli, that I happened to be reading through all the letters of the Baal Shem Tov. It's interesting. Most of the letters were between him and his brother-in-law, Gershon Kitover, and they were talking about it. Just amazing, these letters. You read the letters? Yeah, the letters about when should, Baal Shem Tov talking about, when should I be mitgaleh? Baal Shem Tov went out of his way, you can see it from the letters, to look like an idiot. He would write that, I would write to you in Hebrew, but I don't know Hebrew. So I'm writing in Yiddish, and it's a poor man's Yiddish. And he says, don't fault me, he writes in his letters, don't fault me that I don't know how to learn, because when I was a Yassam, and how do I know how to learn? And then all of a sudden, Gadol Adar, he knows Shas, he knows Paiskim, he knew a lot. The Baal Shem Tov knew a lot. Not to mention Kabbalah, but he was a part of my parish. There was like a secret guild of Mikubalim at that time that would get together and write each other letters and exchange things. And I don't mean secret Kabbalah. I mean they were secretive. They did not publicize themselves. And it was the Baal Shem Tov who said, Baal Shem Tov and his brother-in-law said, let's get this out there. And they were talking about the Zman Gilui, fascinating, and he was communicating with different Mekubalim. And he writes each one of them. He writes, even though I never met you, I love you. He writes, did you see that Lashon? I don't. Ani lo makir oscha, aval ani ohev otcha. He writes, and he writes to them about this Gilui. And one of the things, this I saw in a note from Rav Yitzchak Ginsburg, who brings the letter of the Baal Shem Tov. And one of the notes he writes, this I didn't know, that the time of the Arizal, this is why I'm mentioning all this, was that when the Arizal came to Eretz Yisrael, that was Tchilas Ashmira Hashlishis, Lashon of the Baal Shem Tov. The Ashmira Hashlishis was with the Arizal. It's exactly that's exactly what I was mechaven to. That was a time I don't know the exact years. Baal Shem Tov knew the exact years. I don't know the exact years, and here we are in this era that we're in. And so now let's get back to what he's talking about today.
You compare it to the Simanim and the Gemara then, this era, and the last Simon was a man and his wife talking?
The Tinok Yarnek Mi Shadei Imai, I think that's the correct way to say it. The baby nursing, meaning this was a quiet time and a time of Yunika, a time when the world was getting a certain nurturing. Look, whatever, since the Arizal, whether you're a Chassid or a Masnagid or a Sephardi or an Ashkenazi, like you can't deny the fact that the sort of Chachmas HaKabbalah and the Chachmas HaNister and what's going on in the Shemayim, what's going on under the hood, had this Gilui. And by the way, it's just getting more and more. It's more and more. I mean, the Hasidic Svarim for sure. This is all the Gilui. The Sephardi Svarim for sure. And now the Litvish Svarim. Rabbi Shapiro, and it's all in Yonim of Kabbalah. There's this Gilui of Nister, and this is what the Baal Shem Tov spoke about, and I believe the Gra also spoke like that. I think the Gra spoke of this interesting history. Yeah.
Simanim come at the end of the Ashmara?
It's machlokes in the Gemara, before, during, or after. It's all true, depending on how you count. Here, I get to our point today. I repeated all that because I'm very excited about it. There's a different Lila. Besides for the Lila of Golus, Tzadok speaks about the Lila of our lives. Like, we're not living 2,000 years. We're hoping for 120, but we're not living. So there's the Lila of our lives, or the days of our lives, which have in it a Hester Panim. Fascinating, Reb Tzadok identifies 3 stages in a person's life. The stage of Chamor Noyer, of the braying donkey, the stage of the dogs barking, Klovim Soyakim, and the stage of Tinoik Benekes Mishade Imai. Now, I think this is true. You gentlemen know more about this than I do probably. But in the world of psychology, in the world of philosophy, in the world of sociology, everyone's busy identifying 3 stages in a person's life. It's an interesting thing. Like, if you just open a book about life, and you'll see the 3 stages of life. But let's learn Torah. The 3 stages of life. So let's learn it inside, and then I will explain. In Chaf. Ika mishmoiros barakia. This Reb Tzadok, here's a new way, not just mishmoiros that are happening in the rakia, in the heavens, but lidvarim rakiyim. Let's talk about 3 things, 3 mishmoiros that are happening for ruchniistic things in our life. 3 stages of, I'm going to call it, well, he's going to call it Ritzoni Loimar. What I mean to say, by the way, I love when he says that, the nuance of the language. He says something and he says, Ritzoni Loimar, he says, what I mean is, La Avodas Hashem Yisparach. There are 3 stages in a person's avodah. So listen, like whatever our big job was when we were 20, it's different when you're 50 or 60, and it's different when you're 80 or 90. It's your interests are different, your challenges are different. I can tell you a lot about this. Things change. Things change psychologically, physiologically, socially. Things changes. The purpose of marriage changes. The purpose of parnasa changes. Everything changes. And let's identify it. I'm sure it doesn't change like on the button, but let's identify it. But it's also interesting, by the way, like we always talk about 120 years, so there's 40, 40, 40. But truth is, most of us don't live 120 years. So maybe it's 30, 30, 30, you know? So, and you'll find this throughout Chazal, once you know it. But the way I call it, and this I think is very helpful, is the Gemara in Shabbos, where the Gemara in Shabbos says that Shlomo HaMelech wrote 3 books. He wrote the Shir HaShirim when he was young. He wrote Mishlei when he was middle-aged, and he wrote Kehillas when he was old. Right? So let's think about that for a second. Shir HaShirim, like his whatever you want to mean, his thinking, if you will, was in a love poetry, was in passion and romance. That's what he was thinking. He was thinking about God, but whatever. That was his. Mishlei is a philosophical work where you stop and you consider and think about it. And then Kehillas is, what was all that for? Like, what was the purpose? What do I have from all of that? You know, and that's our sholosh regalim. So, you know, if you could see it from that Chazal, you can see it everywhere, that there are these 3 stages. Shlomo HaMelech went through 3 stages. And he says, Ritzoni Loimar, La'avodas Hashem Yisparach. These are 3 different ways to be Avodas Hashem. So what it means, we don't usually do too much musar here, but I want to say, like you can't, if the right way to be Avodas Hashem was a certain way when you were 20 years old, it's different now if you're not 20. It's a different derech in Avodas Hashem. And we'll see it in earthly symbols. Binyanim hapchusim va'avodas ha'adam. You'll find it in the lowliest things. You'll find indicators and signs of this in the lowliest things. Kach mamish dugmasai. But that's the way it is, because Malchus. Malchus means it's just one thing. What's going on in Shemayim, what's going on here, is the same thing. So kach mamish dugmasai mimenu nikach la'avodas Hashem ba'osays binyan zeh. So when we're in a certain stage, that is our derech of being Avodas Hashem. Simin l'davar, and these are the stages that the Gemara says, Mishmar Rishon, Chamor Noyer. The first Mishmar, the donkey is braying. Let's call it from until we're about 30 or 40, the donkey is braying. HaChomer, Chamor, Chazal say, Chamor is a donkey, but the word is Chomer, which means Gashmias. First years of your life, it's all about acquiring Gashmias. It's all about, the taiva is strong. I gotta, you know, in a good way. It doesn't have to be a bad thing, but like I need to figure out what I'm going to do, how to make money. I'm going to figure out like where I'm going to live. I got to get myself a wife. I got to establish my kid. I got to get to acquisition stage. By the way, one of the places, like I say, every book you open up talks about the 3 stages of life, but one of the most fun ones is a book I read about fundraising. And like, where's the best way? Where's the best time to get a person to give you a lot of money? So when they're acquiring it, when they have it, or when they're spending it. This is a big pilpul amongst the fundraising. It's everywhere. You know, do you get them during the Shiur HaShirim? Now it's so interesting that during Shiur HaShirim, person giving and this, you know, like a person is like all over the place. You know, sowing seeds. You know, like out there. You know, you become very conservative when you reach middle age, and you can become very generous when you get older. And I saw in one of the books of fundraising, I'm trying to remember what it's called, otherwise I would tell you. He said that most people don't ever get to the third stage, not because they don't get old enough, but because they never mature out of the first stage. Maybe they get to the second stage. Like so, like you get stuck in taivas. So it's a fascinating thing. Shiur HaShirim, Mishlei, and Kehillas.
I mean, the fact that you say that a person's life is complete at 70 also, is that it played any factor? Like you were saying, maybe 40, or whatever the case may be.
I know that in Pirkei Avos it says, right, Shishim L'zikna. But it says when you're 100 years old, so avar ubatel min ha'olam, ki iluhu avar ubatel min ha'olam. Hence comes the Yiddish expression oiver batel. So avar ubatel min ha'olam, it sounds like you're not like you're not communicable anymore. You're not, you know, it's a tremendous shevach. Avar ubatel min ha'olam. That means you're not stuck in the Gashmius world at all. Avar ubatel min ha'olam. That's what the words mean in Pirkei Avos. So what we're talking about is that one can get to a stage. This, by the way, if I have to say that, like in the Klal Yisrael, we know we're machabed zakenim not just because they're old. It's interesting that the Gedolei Hadar, like you only qualify for that position once you're 80. Now in the young Israel of Acts, they always want a young rabbi. So what do we do? Like, you know, oh, you're 30, you're like, so the shuls, the boards of shuls argue, well, we don't want a rabbi for 10 years, and he's going to drop dead or have a heart attack. We want a rabbi for, you know, with our kids all the time. Okay, maybe that's on the cuffs list. Mostly I think they want a rabbi they can control, a rabbi who's going to work 24/7, a rabbi who's hungry, a rabbi who wants to please people, like a, okay, that's my cynical, experienced point of view. It's interesting when we go to sages, no matter how smart you are, you know, kol kula, 30, 40 years old, you're not a gadol. The Einei Ha'eda starts at 70, I'm telling you. And the reason is because it's not, and Rav Tzadok explains this. Rav Tzadok explains this, we'll see it inside. The gadol, no matter how much you know, is not during the time of the gashmius. Chamor noyer is a time of your gashmius, your choimer is screaming out to you. And it's not even in the time of klavim tzoakim. He's going to explain this, which is a very unsettled time, and it's the time of godless, the time of being a sage, is in the final stage, the final third. Tinaik yonek mishadei imai. You're nurturing the next generation, and it's hard. You know, it's difficult, like when everybody else is retiring, to all of a sudden start to become a gadol. And not to worry, because most people don't. But the fact is that those that take the achrais at that age, that can hardly move, people walking with them on both sides, they can hardly move, and they're, like the Chaim was at that age. It was at that stage of life where he became the Chaim. It's a fascinating thing.
Oh, there means there's a transition over.
Transition, very good. Similar davar, I want to read a little bit more, but similar davar, mishmar rishon chamar noyer hachomer. When we talk about chamar, braying, we talk about chomer, dugmas chamar. And he says this is a mefurish Gemara. It says Tzadok al shadarach shadarshu yivamas samach beis amid aleph im hadoima lechamar. This week's parsha, right? Im hadoima lechamar. So it's Gewalt, like Avraham Avinu takes Yitzchak to the Akedah, and he says to Yishmael and to Eliezer, Shvu lochem poi im hadoime im achamor. You stay here with the donkey. And the Gemara Darshans in Yavamas, am hadoime lechamor. The Gashmiya stays here. I go up the hill with Yitzchak.
There's also connected to the fact that that's really at the beginning of the morning.
The first, well, it's the end of the night so far, right? So we're starting to see rays of sun. I want to share something with you very briefly. I think I have the history correct. But Rav Soloveitchik, Olav Shalom, was appointed at one time he was appointed the head of the World Mizrahi movement, which is a movement building Eretz Yisrael, from Eretz Yisrael. Not so sure how political Rav Soloveitchik was. I didn't know him that well. I don't think it was, but I think he understood to build Eretz Yisrael. And when he gave his first speech as the head of the World Mizrahi movement, this is what he said. He said, it's written, he said to all the Balabata that were there, Shvu lachem poi im achamor, va'ani va'anar nelcha ad koi. That was his inaugural address. And he explained to them that it's so important to have the accompaniment of Yishmael and Eliezer on your two sides, not to mention the literal donkeys, carrying the burden and walking. But when it comes to the Akedah, when it comes to actually doing the Avodas Hashem, he told them, Shvu lachem poi im achamor. You wait here with this Gashmias. It doesn't go up the mountain. Va'ani va'anar nelcha ad koi. It gets better, because leave this stage, I'm going to the next stage. Ani va'anar nelcha ad koi, which the Mekubalim explains right in the Zohar. It's nelcha ad koi. What's the ko? So ko is, Zohar says, 25, because he was going up the 50 Sha'arim of Tahara. And the way it works is, you go 25, Hashem meets you in the middle. Ani va'anar nelcha ad koi, v'nishtachave, v'nashuva elechem. And then we'll come right back down to you. I'll get back to you. Meaning, it's not like you leave the Gashmis behind, but there's a certain spiritual journey that has to take place, guidance that has to take place, leadership that has to take place, and we'll take care of that. Meet with Hashem, v'nishtachave, v'nashuva aleichem, and then we'll be back in touch. Why? Because again, you need the Gashmias. Like I said, Rav Soloveitchik wasn't a political person, but they're so political. Meaning it's political in a good way. It so explains the roles of the political system in Eretz Yisrael and the rabbinic system and the Das, but they're different, represented by different stages. And the trick at the end of the whole story is to merge it and homogenize that which I received on the mountain, like Moshe Rabbeinu, that which I received on the mountain, back to the people, to Yisrael. Right? We go straight to Parshas Yisrael, where ma koreh po b'shetach, like how's this manifesting itself in a real world where people are coming with shilas and tainas and your porch is on top of my porch and blah blah blah, like stuff that we hear all day. No, that's the way it's supposed to be. That's not, because if you stay on the mountain, you did nothing. You have to have that spiritual experience. Grab what you can grab, and that's what happens in the first stage, second stage, third stage. What does it mean, lemaisa? It means that when my chamor or my chomer or my gashmias is screaming, so that means So I'm in my acquisition stage. I'm in the stage of trying to get together everything I can to accumulate, to get. And it's a very, like you say, passionate time, but it's a very, give me time, establishing myself. That's the time of Maisa, he says, and since it's the time of Asiya, that's the time to learn a lot and do a lot about the Maisa mitzvahs. You get old, you can't even do some of the mitzvahs. But now you can do mitzvahs. So it has to parallel, the Asiya has to parallel. And then you get to the next stage, and it's a little further here. Sheni, the second stage, is Klavim Tsayakim. What in the world? Klavim Tsayakim. The dogs are barking. You'll find in the Zayar, Tzvachin Kekalba B'Tfilah. There has this expression where it says he's screaming like a dog while he's davening. Now, dogs are barking. It's unpleasant. It's scary, territorial. But why are dogs barking? Territorial, I presume. Holding their terror. Somebody is invading. So dogs are barking. So what's it got to do with davening? What does it have to do with tefillah? What do you say? Kesher tefillah. Ani kalben de chatzifim.
Saying the darkness is when you're going to be crying out the most because you don't have much, you don't see Hashem as much, and you're begging for it.
Very good. I read from you from the Dover Tzadok that he brings here in the bottom, but this is what I went through yesterday. The Dover Tzadok in Ches, it's a parallel Reb Tzadok. Tzayakin kamay kelev. I'll just read to you a little bit. Kamay sha kelev makir es karnai. The dog knows his owner, right, and is actually loyal to his owner. Dogs are, you hear all the time about dogs saving people's lives. I don't hear so many stories about cats, but dogs. Your rabbit saved your life. Dogs. Keino adam nitzrach. Not right, no? Like it's a dog thing. Right? You don't find somebody's hamster saved up. It's a dog thing. Akelav makir is karnai. Kain ha'adam nitzrach b'shas hatzfila lakach sheyeda lifnei miat oimet. So like a dog, the dog part of me is that I recognize my owner, my master. That's the good part. U'b'madrega zu, hemoivdim al kol pam, reading from Dover telling me you don't have this. But hemoivdim al kol panim, avidasam, he says, but there's a downside to this dog thing. Yes, he's loyal to his owner, but raksha avidasam ligarmayu. The dog's barking is for the dog's sake. Generally speaking, ligarmayu, havlon chaya, havlon mezayne. Loyluk meshchina me'afra, as opposed to barking for others. The barking of the dog, b'derech klal, has the downside. This is the stage that we need to be mekadesh, is barking like territorial. So here's the thing, like, it's got an upside and a downside. So we move from just like gashmias to prayer. But the prayer is for me. It's still hard for me in stage 2 of life. In stage 2 of Lila, it's still hard for me to daven for the Shechina, for peace in the world, for the Geula, or maybe even for other people. That has nothing to do with us. We do it, but that's where we're going. Stage 2 is davening, so it's a very interesting thing. It's a spiritual time, but it's a self-centered spiritual time. That's a klavim tzayakim. Self-centered spirituality. Fascinating. I'm older than most of you. No, okay, you know that. What I'm saying is, like, you could actually feel, at least in retrospect, you could feel the stages. You're going through the stage, but your neshama does not belong to the Klal Yisrael, to the tzibur. It doesn't happen yet unless when somebody's very. And this, he keeps telling us, and I'm going to keep on going back to this. This doesn't happen automatically. This is a maturation process, which one needs to. In other words, what was good when I was 20 and what was spiritual when I was 20 is not the right thing anymore when you're 50, let's say, however you want to divide up your 3. It's not the right thing anymore. And that's not the right thing as when you're 80. There's different things. You know, if I can give you a mushal, thank you for listening, but I talk to a lot of people. I don't know, like, whether I say good or I don't say good, it's siyata d'shmaya. But I do listen to a lot of people. And, I think something like what the world calls a midlife crisis, but I don't mean that so much as, like, for instance, when people get to a stage where they biologically are not having more children. So there's a certain, like, a depression that comes in, mostly with women, but also with men. Like, and they're yearning for those productive, procreative years. But, it's over. and what it means that it's over doesn't mean necessarily like go do tipulim. Everything's possible these days. But what it means is you're in the next stage of life. And I often feel, and like, get me good on this one, there's a new job in life when you get a little older, which I call eldering. Meaning your children need you, your grandchildren need you, the generation needs you, the world needs you. Not necessarily to be having kids. I'm not making now halachic, psukim. I'm just looking at stages of a person's life. It's very difficult for people to transition from one stage to the other. What, did I get old all of a sudden? It's nice to get old. It's, gray hair is a badge of honor. They say v'takum. But what it means is that, like, what we need to be thinking all the time is, like, what stage and this is really this whole oischaf. What stage am I in? Where am I going? And what's the difference in the stages? And what's my job now? Which manifests itself in Shemayim, Mishmaris b'Shemayim, and it manifests itself here ba'aretz with Klavim Tzayakim. So am I in the Chamor Noyer stage? Like, get? Or am I in the Klavim Tzayakim where I start to mishlei, like I start to philosophize about life and what is it, but it's still self-centered? Or am I in the final stages of my maturity where I'm nurturing the next generation? Tinaik yonek mishada imay. Isha misaperes imbalo. Like, it's a more mature. You don't want to be there when you're 21 years old. But it's now it's all about eldering in the next generation, which we need to age graciously and gracefully. We need to be able to move through this maturity. And it's like this in Gashmias, it's like this in the Bria, and it's also like this in our spirituality. Our avoda is different. So I once heard, what I mean is I heard once Rav Yaacov Kamenetsky speak, and came to yeshiva and he spoke, and he was kind of like against the derech halimud of the yeshivas. That was the subject. The kvetch and this. And but I remember, I can't remember everything that he said, but I do remember he said this sentence. He says, bis 20er, he says, until you're 20 years old. So you learn how to learn. He says, but once you're 20, hape don't learn it. Now start learning. You spend the rest of your life learning how to learn? In another nusach, the Gedolim have said, like, you spend so many years making a living, but when does the actual living take place? You spend your whole life making a living. But you gotta live. And v'chuli v'chuli, so what he's telling us here is such a deep thing. Just like Golus has 3 stages, so too, the Lila of a person. Why is it called the Lila of a person? Because the challenges of a person, the challenges of a person, and it's indicated by Gashmias, and it's indicated by Klavim, and it's indicated by the things that it's indicated for. But we need to get there in a proper way. And next week we'll get to the Tinuk Yonik, which is Hainu Torah. One last thing I just want to say, just to think about, and that is that how much we learned in Nefesh HaChaim about Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama. So Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama, 3 parts of a person, is exactly the same thing as this. You start with Nefesh, you go to Ruach, you go to Neshama. And Torah, Avodah, and Kehillas Hatzadik, as Reb Tzadok writes, is in reverse in this world, is the same thing. There's a time of Maisa, there's a time of Tefillah, Chavim Tzayakim, and there's a time of Torah, which means to teach. That's what it means, right? To learn, to teach, to do good for others. Like this trifecta is here on every level of life, and hence you have 10 oisiyos in Reb Tzadok. Shkoyach, have a wonderful day, wonderful Shabbos.